My name is Alara, and for the first 28 years of my life, I believed myself to be a creature of the tides, a quiet inhabitant of the small, salt-sprayed town of Port Blossom. My world was measured by the rhythm of the waves against the shore and the scent of lavender and seawormwood that clung to my grandmother's house. I was a watercolor painting in a world that, I was often told, valued the sharp, definitive lines of an oil portrait. I worked part-time at the local library, a sanctuary of hushed whispers and stories bound in cloth and paper, and I was married to a man who saw my quiet nature not as a gentle strength, but as a flaw to be corrected. My grandmother, Anya, was the anchor of my existence. Her hands, gnarled by age but always gentle, had braided my hair, tended my scraped knees, and held mine through every small sorrow and joy. She was the keeper of my heart, and when she passed, the tide of my own life felt as if it had gone out, leaving me stranded on a vast and empty shore. The day we laid her to rest, a mournful autumn wind swept in from the sea, carrying the sharp tang of salt and the damp chill of impending rain. It tugged at the dark fabric of my coat and whispered through the skeletal branches of the cypress trees guarding the cemetery. Each gust felt like a sigh from the world itself, echoing the hollow ache in my chest as I watched Anya's simple wooden coffin be lowered into the earth. The tears that traced paths down my cheeks were cold, but not as cold as the profound loneliness that had taken root inside me. Across the grave, my sister, Lyra, stood straight and still, a stark silhouette against the gray sky. She wore a black suit so perfectly tailored it seemed to repel the grief that saturated the air around the rest of us. Lyra had left Port Blossom a decade ago, trading our town's gentle rhythms for the frantic, glittering pulse of the metropolis of Silverwood. She had forged a life of sharp angles and high stakes, her visits home becoming rare and brief, like migratory birds who had forgotten the way back to their nesting grounds. We were sisters, born of the same love, but we had grown into different languages. Lyra spoke in spreadsheets and stock prices. I spoke in the rustle of turning pages and the crash of waves on the beach. The space between us had widened from a playful gap into a silent, uncrossable canyon. As the small gathering of friends and neighbors began to dissolve, their quiet condolences lost to the wind, Lyra approached. Her gaze, a cool, assessing blue, skimmed past my tear-stained face. "I have a flight back this evening, Alara," she said, her voice crisp, efficient. "The quarterly reports won't write themselves." I could only nod, a lump of unspoken words caught in my throat. Of course, I managed to whisper. The two words felt like a betrayal of the grief I knew Anya deserved. "The solicitor is reading the will tomorrow morning at 10. Don't be late." It was a command, not a request. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the gleaming silver car she'd rented, a vessel of chrome and steel that looked alien in our town of faded paint and weathered wood. I watched her go, a familiar pang of inadequacy tightening its grip around my heart. With Anya gone, the last true thread of family felt as if it were unraveling in my hands. The solicitor's office the next day was a small, airless room that smelled of old paper and bitter coffee. I sat on a stiff-backed chair, my hands knotted in my lap, trying to make myself as small as possible. My husband, Ronan, stood behind me, his presence a heavy weight of disapproval. Ronan had never bothered to hide his disdain for Anya. He called her house a hoarder's den and dismissed her stories of the old days as the ramblings of a woman lost in the past. To him, my deep, unwavering love for my grandmother was just another of my sentimental weaknesses, a frustrating quirk he had to tolerate. The solicitor, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with weary resignation, cleared his throat and began to read from the document. The legalese washed over me, a meaningless drone, until two specific bequests snapped me back to the present. To Lyra, Anya had left her most valuable asset, a stunning cliffside villa with panoramic views of the ocean, a property whose worth was whispered about in reverent tones throughout Port Blossom. It was a perfect fit for Lyra's polished, successful life. And to me, Alara, she had left her car, a 1960s Morris Minor, sage green and affectionately nicknamed the Sage. It had sat in the garage for the better part of a decade, a monument of faded paint, gentle curves, and a fine layer of dust and rust. A thick silence filled the room, broken only by a sharp, derisive snort from Ronan. Lyra's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose in a delicate arch of what looked like pity mixed with triumph. "This is a joke, right?" Ronan's voice boomed, making me flinch. He took a step forward, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "She gets a property worth a fortune, and Alara gets a heap of scrap metal? There must be a mistake in the paperwork." The solicitor adjusted his spectacles, his expression unchanging. "The will is clear, Mr. Nolan. It was your grandmother's final wish, documented and legally sound." Lyra's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm incredibly grateful for the villa, of course," she said, her tone a masterclass in feigned sympathy. "But really, Alara, a car that doesn't even run? What was Anya thinking? It's almost cruel." I sat frozen, the words swirling around me. "A joke? Cruel? Why?" The Sage wasn't just a car. It was the vessel of 1,000 childhood memories. Anya driving me to the beach for picnics, her hands steady on the wheel. The smell of the worn leather seats mixed with the scent of her lavender perfume. Her stories of road trips taken long before I was born. But what did it mean? What message was my grandmother trying to send from beyond the grave? The storm of Ronan's fury broke the moment we were back in our small, tidy house, a house that had always felt more like his than ours. He paced the living room like a caged animal, his words a torrent of venom. "Useless, Alara. You're completely and utterly useless," he spat, his voice rising with each word. He grabbed my upper arms, his fingers digging in painfully. "You couldn't even manage to inherit something of value. What in God's name are we supposed to do with that rusted-out piece of junk?" "It's not my fault, Ronan," I whispered, my own voice trembling. I didn't know. He wasn't listening. His rage was a force of nature, consuming everything in its path. "Pack a bag and get out," he snarled, shoving me hard towards the hallway. "I'm done. I'm done with you and your pathetic, sentimental baggage." The world tilted on its axis. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Years. We had been married for 6 years. I had cooked his meals, cleaned his house, soothed his tempers, and shrunk myself to fit into the small, quiet box he had built for me. And now he was casting me out as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture. Where will I go?" The question was a faint, broken sound. "I don't give a damn," he said, his eyes as cold and hard as river stones. "Go sleep in your grandmother's precious car for all I care. Just get out of my sight." With a single suitcase filled with a haphazard collection of clothes and books, I walked out into the encroaching twilight. The familiar streets of Port Blossom suddenly felt alien and hostile. The world I knew had shattered, and I was left standing among the pieces, utterly alone. My feet, moving with a will of their own, carried me through the winding lanes to Anya's old house, to the garage that had been my childhood haven. The Sage stood there in the gloom, a gentle, rounded shape under a film of dust. It looked tired, neglected, but to my eyes, it was beautiful. I ran a hand over the cool, smooth curve of its fender, and a memory surfaced, clear as a bell, Anya's voice, warm and melodic as we polished the chrome together years ago. "This old car is more than just metal and wheels, my little starling. It's a keeper of stories, a piece of our history." In the pocket of the coat Anya had given me last Christmas, my fingers found a small, stiff envelope. Inside were the keys to the Sage, and a folded note in her familiar, elegant script. "This is for you, my love. Be brave." Clutching the keys so tightly their edges bit into my palm, I repeated her words like a prayer. "Be brave. Be brave." Anya had believed in me. She had entrusted me with this. Whatever it was, Whatever it meant, I would not let her down. A tiny, fragile spark of resolve flickered to life in the desolate landscape of my heart. My hands, still trembling, fumbled with the key for the boot. The lock was stiff from disuse, but with a final, determined twist, it clicked open. The hinges groaned in protest as I lifted the heavy lid, releasing a puff of dusty air that smelled of old oil, weathered leather, and something else, a faint, lingering trace of Anya's lavender. It was like breathing in a memory. I used my phone's flashlight to pierce the darkness, the beam dancing over the spare tire and a collection of old blankets. And then I saw it. Tucked into the far corner was a handsome leather satchel, its surface softened and creased with age, and beside it, a small but heavy metal strongbox, its surface dark and unadorned. On top of the box lay another folded piece of paper. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I reached for the satchel first. The leather felt warm, alive, as if it still held the heat of the hands that had carried it. As I unbuckled the straps and opened the flap, my breath caught in my throat. It was filled with dozens of black and white photographs. Young men and women in uniforms I didn't recognize stared back at me, their faces etched with a mixture of exhaustion and fierce determination. They were pictured in bombed-out cityscapes, leaning against military vehicles, their gazes direct and unflinching. On the back of one, a faded inscription read, "Sasha, Victor, Irina. Comrades in the fight. 1943. Beneath the photos were brittle, yellowed documents, official-looking papers with stamps and signatures, praising Anya's work as a nurse on the front lines, hand-drawn maps of unfamiliar territories, marked with cryptic circles and lines, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded silk ribbon, the ink on the pages a faint brown against the fragile paper. I didn't understand what any of it meant, but I felt the profound weight of a life I had never known, a history my grandmother had carried in silence. I set the satchel aside and turned my attention to the strongbox. It was locked, and the key was nowhere to be found. Gently, I picked up the letter resting on top. It was another note from Anya, her handwriting a little shakier this time, as if written with a sense of urgency. "My dearest Alara," it began. "If you are reading this, then my time has come. Do not be frightened by what you have found. This old car is not a burden, but a legacy. It is a time capsule, a testament to a generation that fought for the very air we breathe. The strongbox contains gold coins and bars I helped hide from the invaders during the war. It was used to buy medicine, to smuggle families to safety, to fund the resistance. It saved lives, my love. Now it is yours to do with as you see fit. But know that its true value is not in its weight, but in the freedom it purchased. A word of caution. Do not speak of this to Lyra. Her heart, I fear, is drawn to the shine of things, and she may not understand the soul of this inheritance. This is for you, and you alone. Be brave." I sank to the dusty concrete floor, the letter clutched in my hand, tears blurring my vision. Anya, my quiet, gentle grandmother who baked apple cakes and told stories of mischievous sprites in her garden, had been a heroine. A resistance fighter. A guardian of treasure meant to save lives. The revelation was so immense it felt unreal, like I had stumbled into the plot of an old film. My gaze fell on the strongbox, its humble exterior belying the incredible secret it held. Gold. Why me? Why not Lyra, the sister who was so much more decisive, so much more capable of handling such a thing? What was I, quiet Alara who could barely stand up to her own husband, supposed to do with a legacy of gold and heroism? Then I remembered a line from Anya's first note, one I had glossed over. "You will find my diary hidden in the car. Read it. It will explain everything." A renewed sense of purpose surged through me. I scrambled back to the open boot, my fingers searching every nook and cranny. Beneath the spare tire, my hand closed around something hard and rectangular wrapped in oilcloth. I pulled it out and unwrapped it to reveal a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with time. I climbed into the driver's seat of the Sage. The worn leather sighed under my weight, and for a moment, I felt as if Anya were sitting right there beside me. In the thin, pale light of my phone, I opened the diary. The first entry was dated 1941. "The sky is on fire," it read. "The world we knew is gone. There is only fear and ashes and the sound of weeping. But we are not a people who break. We will fight. In the forests, in the shadows, we will be the ghosts they cannot catch, the hope they cannot extinguish." Page after page, I was pulled into a world of breathtaking courage and devastating loss. Anya's elegant script chronicled her life not just as a nurse, but as a vital part of the partisan network. She described smuggling medical supplies past enemy checkpoints, her heart pounding with every soldier's gaze. She wrote of treating wounded fighters in secret forest clearings by moonlight, of helping Jewish families escape to safety through hidden routes, of carrying coded messages tucked into the hollowed-out heels of her shoes. I discovered a grandmother I had never known, a woman of fierce intellect, poetic soul, and unshakable resolve. One entry, dated late in 1942, described the gold. A wealthy Jewish merchant, a friend of her father's, had foreseen the coming darkness. Before he and his family were taken away, he entrusted Anya, then just a young woman, with his family's fortune, begging her to use it for good. "This gold is not a treasure to be hoarded," Anya wrote, her words burning with conviction. "It is a tool. It is medicine. It is a weapon against despair. Every coin spent is a life we might save, a blow we might strike for freedom. I am not its owner. I am merely its steward." I read through the night, the garage my cocoon, the diary my window into a past that was both terrifying and profoundly inspiring. It detailed not only acts of war, but acts of incredible humanity, sharing a last piece of bread, singing quiet songs to keep spirits up, tending a hidden vegetable garden that fed dozens. It explained her trust in me. In one of the final entries, written only a year ago, she wrote, "Alara has my heart. She feels the world deeply. She understands that the most valuable things are not those we can hold, but those we hold within us: love, memory, integrity. She will know what to do. She will honor the stories." Exhausted, overwhelmed, but filled with a new and unfamiliar strength, I knew what I had to do. I could not betray the trust of the woman Anya had been. The next morning, my hands still shook as I looked up the number for the Port Blossom Historical Society. It was housed in a grand old sea captain's mansion that had fallen into gentle disrepair, a fitting home for the town's ghosts. A man with a warm, thoughtful voice answered the phone. His name was Alistair. I stumbled through my story, my voice catching as I spoke of the diary, the photos, the documents. When I finally mentioned the gold, there was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a surge of barely contained excitement. "Please," he said, his voice urgent but kind. "Please, can you come in? As soon as possible." Alistair was a tall, kind-eyed man in his late 30s, with a passion for history that seemed to radiate from him like warmth from a hearth. His office was a delightful chaos of books, maps, and artifacts, smelling richly of paper and time. With trembling hands, I unpacked the contents of the leather satchel onto his large oak desk. He treated every photograph, every brittle letter, with a reverence that brought tears to my eyes. He listened, his gaze full of empathy and wonder, as I recounted what I had learned from the diary, his pen flying across a legal pad. When I finally produced the key to the strongbox I had found it cleverly hidden inside the diary's spine and opened the lid, Alistair let out a soft, astonished breath. The gold inside seemed to absorb the light of the room and reflect it back, a soft, deep glow. It wasn't a pirate's treasure. It was somber, heavy, imbued with the gravity of its purpose. Gold sovereigns, small ingots carefully wrapped in oilcloth, each one a testament to a life saved, a hope kept alive. This is a landmark discovery, Alara," he whispered, looking from the gold to me, his eyes shining. "This isn't just wealth. This is a story our country needs to hear. the days that followed were a whirlwind. The Historical Society came alive with a quiet, fervent energy. Experts were called in. They authenticated the gold, pored over Anya's diary, and cross-referenced the names and places with National Archives. My grandmother's story, once a secret held in a dusty garage, began to emerge, piece by incredible piece, into the light. The local newspaper got wind of it, and soon the Port Blossom treasure was front-page news. Television crews parked their vans on the quiet streets. Journalists and historians from all over the country began calling, wanting to speak to the granddaughter of the unassuming war heroine. At first, I was terrified. I was Alara, the quiet librarian, not the spokesperson for a national treasure. But as I began to speak about Anya, I found my voice. I spoke of her courage, her compassion, her quiet strength. I told her story not as a legend, but as the truth of a woman who loved her people and her country more than her own safety. And with every word, I felt myself standing a little taller. Predictably, the news brought the vultures circling. Ronan was the first. My phone lit up with a barrage of texts and calls, each one a syrupy blend of feigned remorse and desperate pleas. I was a fool, Alara. I miss you. We can be rich. Please, come back. I let the phone ring, but one evening, I finally answered. His voice was slick with a charm I now saw as utterly transparent. I let him speak, and then, in a voice that was clear and steady and entirely my own, I said, "The woman you threw out of your house doesn't exist anymore, Ronan. You're right, you were a fool. But not for letting me go. You were a fool for never seeing who I was in the first place. Goodbye." I hung up before he could respond, a feeling of clean, sharp liberation washing over me. Lyra called next. Her tone was casual, breezy, as if nothing had happened. "Alara, darling. This is all so exciting. Obviously, as a family, we need to decide what to do with the gold. I have a financial advisor who could triple its value in a few years." A sad smile touched my lips. She still didn't understand. "There's nothing to decide, Lyra," I said gently. "I've already made my choice. Everything, the gold, the diary, the photographs, is being donated to the museum. It will be part of a permanent exhibit honoring Anya and the resistance movement." Her mask of casualness dropped, replaced by a torrent of furious disbelief. "Are you insane? You're giving away a fortune. For what? A dusty museum exhibit? Anya would have wanted us to be secure, to be successful." "No, Lyra," I said, my voice firm but without anger. "Anya would have wanted her story to be told. She would have wanted the sacrifice of her comrades to be remembered. This was never about money. It was about legacy. I'm sorry you can't see that." I ended the call, the silence that followed filled not with regret, but with a profound sense of rightness. I was honoring the steward, not just the gold. A few weeks later, after signing the final donation papers, I packed my single suitcase and a few boxes of books into the passenger seat of the Sage. Alistair and his team had lovingly restored the car's engine. It now hummed with a quiet, steady rhythm. As I prepared to leave Port Blossom, Alistair shook my hand. "Your grandmother would be so incredibly proud of you, Alara," he said, his warm gaze full of respect. "You haven't just preserved history. You've embodied its spirit." I smiled, a real, unburdened smile. I knew he was right. As I drove the Sage out of town, the setting sun painted the sky in streaks of gold and rose, and I felt the weight of my old life fall away. The road ahead was an unknown country, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was the granddaughter of Anya, the keeper of stories, and my own story was just beginning. I settled in a city far from the sea, a place of parks and universities, and built a new life from the ground up. I found a cozy attic apartment with a window that overlooked a canopy of oak trees, and I took a job at a quiet archival library, helping to preserve the very kinds of histories I had uncovered in my grandmother's car. The work was peaceful, meaningful. For the first time, I felt I was living in my own skin, breathing my own air. I was no longer a reflection of a husband's expectations or a sister's success. I was just Alara, and that was more than enough. The knowledge was a quiet, steady joy, a wellspring of peace deep inside me. Lyra would occasionally send postcards from her cliffside villa, which she had renamed the Lyra. They were glossy pictures of a life that looked like a magazine spread: infinity pools, champagne flutes, beautiful people laughing against a backdrop of a perfect sunset. The messages were always brief, detailing a new acquisition or a lavish party. She never asked how I was. I felt no envy, only a quiet pang of sorrow for her. She had the treasure, but I had the wealth. In my spare time, I delved deeper into Anya's story, using my skills as a researcher to trace the lives of the people in the photographs. I learned that my grandmother, before the war, had been a budding poet, a lover of botany, a young woman with dreams of teaching literature. The war had stolen those dreams, but it had forged her into something else: a healer, a protector, a quiet leader. After the war, she had returned to Port Blossom and poured her strength into rebuilding the community, never speaking of the horrors she had seen or the heroism she had shown. One spring afternoon, nearly a year after I had left Port Blossom, Lyra called. Her voice was different, smaller, uncertain. She asked if she could come and visit. A part of me was wary, but a stronger part, the part that still remembered braiding each other's hair as children, agreed. When she arrived at my small apartment, she looked diminished. The expensive clothes seemed to hang off her, and there were shadows under her eyes that no amount of makeup could conceal. Over cups of tea, in the gentle afternoon light filtering through my window, she finally broke down. "I'm so lonely, Alara," she confessed, her voice cracking. "I have everything I ever thought I wanted. The house, the money, the success. But it's all so empty. It's just things." I reached across the table and took her hand. It felt cold and fragile in mine. "I know what that feels like," I said softly. "It took losing everything for me to realize that happiness isn't something you acquire. It's something you build from the inside out." Tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. "You were right," she whispered. "About Anya. About everything." I went to the museum exhibit. I saw her diary, her picture. I stood there for hours, just reading. I was so proud and so ashamed of myself. We spent the next few days together. We walked through the city parks, visited museums, and talked for hours, bridging the canyon that had separated us for so long. We spoke of our childhood, of Anya, of the different paths we had taken. It was not a magical fix, but it was a beginning. When it was time for her to leave, she hugged me tightly, a real hug, full of warmth and regret. "Thank you, Alara. I love you." "I love you too, Lyra," I whispered back, my own heart full. As I watched her taxi pull away, I felt a new sense of completeness. I was not an island. I had a sister. I had family. I had a connection to a past that gave me strength and a future that I was building with my own two hands. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I take the Sage for a drive. The old engine hums a steady, comforting tune, a mechanical heartbeat connecting me to my grandmother. The world unfolds through its wide windscreen, a landscape of possibility. I am Alara, a woman shaped by love and loss, forged in grief, and freed by a legacy of quiet courage. And as I navigate the roads of my new life, I feel Anya's presence with me, not as a ghost, but as the gentle, unwavering belief that I, too, can be brave.